As I begin this morning, I'd like to say a special word of greeting to our international and ecumenical guests. On behalf of the General Synod, friends, I want to again thank you for being with us. Thank you for traveling the distances to share this General Synod with us, because you are very much an important ingredient of this beloved community. This morning I stand before you as a candidate for a second term as General Minister and President, and I am thankful for the opportunity to do so. 4 years ago, in my first candidate address to the General Synod, I told the delegates then that we are in this thing together, and together we have been. I am truly grateful for the many ways that I have been received and supported in this ministry. I have been a recipient of extravagant hospitality of local churches and their leaders, both lay and clergy. I've experienced the support and guidance of colleagues, especially those in conference ministry. My conference minister colleagues and I have worked together these last 3 or 4 years, and they have been a tremendous support, making it possible for me to be so many places throughout the life of the United Church of Christ. So I'm deeply appreciative of all that they do. And certainly, I can't say enough about my working relationship with the Collegium of Officers that you heard so eloquently expressed this morning. The first Collegium of Officers was also a gift to me, so I'm saying thanks to Steve Sterner and Callie Rogers-Whitty and Edith Guffey, and of course Linda Jaramillo, who has been with me all along. And thanks to the Collegium that we have had for the last 2 years. Again, Linda, Ben, Jim, and Mark. I give them thanks. I wonder if any of you remember these words. I was born by the river in a little tent, and just like that old river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know that a change is gonna come one day. I'm sure that many of you do remember those words. They are the immortal words of singer-songwriter Sam Cooke, who penned them and sang them 50 years ago in 1963. Like so many others, including many in this room, that was a year that made this nation change in the midst of all of the many things going on in the world. It was a time of change, and many in this room, like Sam Cooke, were working for and hoping for change to come, a change in the law, a change in the mind of this nation, a change in the heart of this nation. 1963 was a year that the civil rights movement was at its peak. The movement to end segregation, racial segregation, the movement to secure equal voting rights for all Americans was at its peak. It was a tumultuous time in America. Think about it. In the spring of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. and Fred Shuttlesworth launched the Birmingham campaign, and Martin Luther King wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. In June, NAACP leader Medgar Evers was assassinated in front of his Jackson, Mississippi home by the KKK. That month, all sectors of the civil rights movement in August of that year converged on Washington. As we heard this morning in our speakouts, they converged on Washington for the historic March on Washington, during which Martin Luther King delivered his most famous I Have a Dream speech. In September of that year, following the March on Washington, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham was bombed, killing 4 little girls. And finally, in November 22nd, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Many of us can remember that moment. Yes, 1963 was a year of many significant events in the nation, and by the time this song by Sam Cooke was released by RCA in early 1964, it was on its way to becoming an anthem of hope. This year, 2013, marks the 50th anniversary of the events of 1963, but it also marks the 150th anniversary of another momentous event in American history, the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, which together brought an end to slavery in this country. For people of African descent, for abolitionists, black and white, who had long hoped for and worked for the end to human bondage in America, the Civil War brought an end to slavery, which was a long hoped for change. It's often been said that the only constant in life is change itself. And this morning, what I have to say to you is all about change. And change comes in many forms. It is a multi-dimensional phenomenon. There is sudden change. There is disruptive change. There is resisted change, which often leads to stagnation and death in human organizations like the church. Today, I want to focus, though, on two additional dimensions of change. They are hoped for change and adaptive change. I believe these elements of change are related, and I believe that they are of major import to the Church Universal and more specifically to the United Church of Christ. Hope for change is what the anti-slavery movement was about. The movement of 19th century abolitionists and the year 1863 were about. Hope for change is what the civil rights movement and the year 1963 were about. These were forward movements. Those movements took place over time, and they happened for the purpose of making hoped for change. Now, adaptive change is something else. Adaptive change is what is called for when the context has already changed and there's a need to make a change in your life or in our institution in order to continue to fulfill our mission and purpose. Adaptive change enables us to continue to seek hoped for change, and at its heart, the church exists to pursue hoped for change. Moreover, the church exists to seek and to live the hope for change from our flawed reality of brokenness and sinfulness and to a living reality of the realm of God on earth. In other words, the church exists for transformation of the world to become the realm of God. This is hope, the change we hope for. Remember, Jesus taught us to pray for it. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In his life and ministry and teaching, he always pointed to God and to the realm of God. Ultimately, the business of the church, the mission of the church is seeking, working for, praying for the hoped for change. But hope for change is also often, as Sam Cooke put it, a long time coming. In order to engage in that pursuit over the long haul, adaptive change is necessary. It is essential. If the church is going to exist and to continue to seek to build God's realm on earth, we must be ready to change and adapt to new circumstances in our context. For us, this is not only a changed and changing America, but a changed and changing world. In fact, the move toward our hopes, to move toward our hopes, we need to embrace adaptive change. And this, as we have learned over the last 10 years, this is not easy stuff. But just think about how our context has changed. Our economy has changed to become a global economy. And recently I was on a trip to China representing you and with our global partners, and I saw a country that had been about a lot of the economic change and economic growth that trip helped to explain to me why America has changed, because all of those industries that we once had here are there, and all of those jobs that we once had here are there. That calls for adaptive change to this new reality. We've seen demographic change for a more diverse America, and many of the communities of the frigid north are depleting in population while the southern area is growing. Additional change has been social change. Once our church relied on the volunteerism of women who were homemakers. Now, the vast majority of women are working outside the home, and we cannot depend on them to volunteer in churches anymore. So the context has changed, and the church must change to accommodate that reality. So it is that there are many changes in our context that call on us to adapt to the new reality. I've just named a few in our overall context that have direct bearing on how we understand the church, how we exist as church, and most importantly, how we do church. Adaptive change is the change we must make in order to continue to fulfill our purpose. That is both to embody and to realize the realm of God on earth. When Sam Cooke wrote "A Change is Gonna Come" in 1963, the United Church of Christ was a fledgling new denomination. The church was born in the midst of a hoped-for change from a racially segregated and grossly unjust society that ignored the poor to a society that embraces racial equality, economic justice, and the dignity of all God's children, all of humanity. Soon that hope for a change, that hope expanded to a hope for gender equality. It grew to become a hope for a change from warfare to peace with justice. It continued to grow, and it grew to become a hope for justice and fair employment practices for migrant workers. It expanded to include a hope for a change for being a society that was inaccessible to people with different and limited abilities, to a society that would be fully accessible to all people. And it continued to expand. The hope for a change expanded to become a hope for a change from our being a society that shunned, oppressed, and excluded people because of their sexual orientation, to become a society and a world that embraces all people as children of God. Well, today, the hope for a change is expanding still. We hope for a change from being societies that exploit the earth and its resources to satisfy the greed of a few while polluting the heavens, facilitating climate change and environmental disaster. We hope to change to becoming a world community that acts as responsible stewards of God's creation, working toward a sustainable future. Moreover, today, the hope for a change is to move from unregulated, unnecessary gun ownership and gun-related violence to a social environment where the proliferation of guns and its related violence is a thing of the past. Unfortunately, because of the most recent decisions of the United States Supreme Court, we must now name secure and equal voting rights again for all citizens as a hoped for change. But I want us to remember in this moment that many sacrificed their fortunes and some their lives to secure the right to vote for all Americans. Now we have a court who will not protect that right, even though it is clearly in danger still. Instead of expanding those protections to include places like Ohio, where I live, where voting intimidation was quite evident during the last national election, they lifted all protections. Well, we have to do something about that. I'll add these few thoughts as I draw to a conclusion. The United Church of Christ was born in the midst of an era of major change, and it has always indeed been about the business of seeking hoped-for change. I would suggest to you that an affinity for hope-for change and adaptive change are part and parcel of our institutional DNA. If we are to take the long view and also look closely, we have been making adaptive change not only in every place and not nearly as fast as we would like, but adaptive change we have been making nonetheless. This General Synod will engage adaptive change. The new governance structure of the national setting of the church is an adaptive change in response to our changing context as a church in a changing America. This morning, the Collegium reported on our strategic vision plan. This plan, its bigs and strategies, is a plan that embraces and reflects the adaptive change that we are pursuing. Adaptive change is about the reshaping of our covenanted ministries and the creation of an office of philanthropy and stewardship. Yes, friends, we are going to become more assertive and more open about asking you to support the ministries of the United Church of Christ as individuals, because we know that you can do it. If elected to a second term, and after that I don't know if I'll be elected to a second term, but if elected to a second term, I intend to continue to work with all of you to move our church in all of its settings to be a church that is relevant and responsive to God's call, God's vision, which is our hope for change. And that is God's vision for peace and freedom from violence, oppression in all of its forms, and human exploitation in all of its forms. God's vision for freedom from poverty. God's vision for equal justice and full inclusion for all of God's children. God's vision for the earth and all of creation to be whole and healed. And God's vision for spiritual and physical health and wholeness for all of God's children. Finally, I want to suggest to you that although we often engage the church engage in the church as an institution, the reality of the Church of Jesus Christ is that it is a living, dynamic reality. The body of Christ is a people, a living body, growing when it's at its best, and on a mission to realize hope for change. As long as we are clear about the change we hope for and the mission that we are on, as long as we hold fast to the belief that our hope for change will come, as long as we as long as we are not afraid of adaptive change or dismayed by the changes that we must make, as long as we are able to do those things, we will realize the hope for change. Thank you for listening. And please remember, we are still in this thing together. So let us together think, let us together pray. Let us together worship. And together let us serve and give to live the beloved community and seek its fulfillment on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.